Snow White and the Seven Friends. In a magnificent kingdom, surrounded by dense forests and high mountains, lived Snow White. With hair as black as coal, skin as white as snow, and lips as red as a pomegranate, she was known for her kind heart and enchanting beauty, even more so than Queen Maleficent, her stepmother. Queen Maleficent, a powerful witch, was obsessed with being the most beautiful in the land. Every day she would ask the magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For years the mirror always answered, "Your Majesty, you are the most beautiful." However, as Snow White grew older, her beauty began to shine even brighter. One sunny morning, when Queen Maleficent asked the magic mirror, the answer she received was shocking. "Snow White, Your Majesty," the mirror replied flatly. Queen Maleficent was struck by jealousy. Her beautiful face turned into a mask of rage. She could not accept that her beauty had been surpassed by Snow White. In her heart, seeds of a wicked plan began to grow. She summoned her loyal guard, a cruel hunter named Brutus. "Take Snow White to the deepest part of the forest," commanded Queen Maleficent coldly. "Kill her and bring back her heart as proof." Although known for his cruelty, Brutus hesitated to carry out the order. He could not bear to kill the kind-hearted Snow White, but he was also afraid of Queen Maleficent's wrath. This dilemma weighed heavily on his heart. Brutus took Snow White to the forest in the royal carriage. Along the way, Snow White sang cheerfully, unaware of the danger that threatened her. The innocence and cheerfulness of Snow White made Brutus's heart waver even more. Upon reaching the heart of the dense forest, Brutus stopped the carriage. "Get down, princess," said Brutus in a heavy voice. His face looked grim. Snow White cheerfully got down from the carriage, enchanted by the beauty of the forest. The chirping of birds and the babbling of the river sounded melodious to her ears, unaware of Brutus's sorrowful gaze watching her from behind. In the end, Brutus could not bring himself to kill Snow White. He could not raise his sword against the innocent girl. "Run, princess!" Brutus suddenly shouted. "Run as far as you can and never come back. Queen Maleficent wants to kill you." Snow White was shocked to hear Brutus's words. She did not understand why Queen Maleficent, her stepmother, wanted to kill her. However, she saw sincerity in Brutus's eyes. With tears streaming down her face, Snow White ran into the forest, leaving Brutus and the royal carriage behind. Brutus knew he had to provide proof to Queen Maleficent. He killed a deer and took its heart. With a heavy heart, he returned to the palace, hoping that Queen Maleficent would never discover the truth. Meanwhile, Snow White continued to run deeper into the dark forest, not knowing her destination. She was alone, scared, and lost. The forest, which once seemed beautiful, now felt terrifying. The sounds of wild animals and the shadows of trees made her tremble. Exhausted and frightened, Snow White stumbled and fell near a small wooden cottage hidden behind thick bushes. The cottage looked old and shabby, yet it felt warm and cozy. She knocked on the door cautiously. "Is anyone inside?" asked Snow White with a trembling voice. Suddenly, the door opened slightly. A small eye peeked through the gap. Then 7 small figures appeared from behind the door. They were 7 dwarfs, grumpy, sneezy, dopey, bashful, happy, dock, and sleepy. They were friendly and kind miners. The dwarfs were surprised to see the beautiful and fragile Snow White. They invited her into their cottage. Snow White told the story of her escape from Queen Maleficent and her stepmother's wicked plan. The dwarfs listened attentively. They felt pity for Snow White and promised to protect her. "You can stay with us, Snow White," said Grumpy, the oldest and wisest dwarf. "We will keep you safe." Snow White felt relieved and grateful. She had finally found a safe haven from Queen Maleficent's pursuit. However, Snow White's arrival at the dwarf's cottage also triggered a new conflict. The peaceful and simple lives of the dwarfs would change forever. Queen Maleficent would surely search for Snow White, and the dwarfs had to be ready to face the consequences. Their peaceful life was now threatened. This meeting marked the beginning of a long and challenging adventure for Snow White and her 7 new friends. Life in the dwarf's cottage initially felt peaceful. Snow White helped with household chores while the 7 dwarfs worked in the mines. However, unease still haunted Snow White. She worried that Queen Maleficent would find her. One night, while the dwarfs were sleeping, Snow White discovered a small mirror in the cottage. The mirror looked ordinary, but when Snow White looked into it, she was shocked. The mirror was not an ordinary mirror. It could show glimpses of the future. Snow White saw a vision of Queen Maleficent searching for her with the help of a large, wicked black crow. The crow flew over the forest, searching for Snow White's trail. Snow White also saw a vision of herself injured and captured by Queen Maleficent. Snow White's fear intensified. She shared her vision with the dwarfs. The dwarfs also felt anxious. They realized that they could not hide forever. They had to come up with a plan to confront Queen Maleficent. Doc, the smartest dwarf, suggested that they seek help from a good witch who lived in the neighboring forest. However, Bashful, the most timid dwarf, objected. He was afraid of facing greater dangers. A debate ensued among the dwarfs. Snow White tried to calm them. She realized that they needed to unite and support each other to face the impending threat. The discovery of this magic mirror clarified the lurking danger and forced Snow White and the 7 dwarfs to take action. The conflict escalated, and they had to wisely decide their next steps. After a long debate, the dwarfs finally agreed to seek help from the good witch living in the enchanted forest. The journey to the enchanted forest was full of challenges. They had to cross a raging river, a dark forest, and steep cliffs. Snow White, who was used to living in a palace, had to adapt to life in the wild. Strong, the strongest dwarf, helped them overcome physical obstacles. Doc, with his intelligence, guided them through difficult paths. Dopey, with his large body, protected them from wild animals. Sneezy, with his speed, helped them avoid danger. Grumpy, although grumpy, provided encouragement and moral support. Bashful, despite his fear, tried to be brave for his friends. And Grumpy, with his wisdom, offered advice and guidance. Along the way, they faced various obstacles. They had to fight against wild animals, avoid traps, and overcome their fears. Their friendship grew stronger amidst the trials. They helped and supported each other. Snow White learned to be braver and more independent. The dwarfs learned to be more confident and work together. This journey tested not only their physical strength but also the strength of their friendship. They learned to rely on each other and appreciate one another. This challenging journey strengthened their bond of friendship and prepared them to face greater challenges in the enchanted forest. They were getting closer to their goal, but danger still lurked around every corner of the forest. Finally, Snow White and the 7 dwarfs arrived at the enchanted forest. This forest looked different from any other forest they had passed through. The trees towered high, and sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy. The air felt cold and mystical. They had to pass various trials to reach the Good Witch. The first trial was to cross a river guarded by a small dragon that loved to play with fire. Doc managed to calm the dragon with a clever riddle. The second trial was to navigate through a forest filled with traps set by mischievous fairies. Sneezy, with his speed, successfully avoided all the traps. The third trial was to climb a steep and slippery cliff. Strong, with his strength, helped his friends safely navigate the cliff. In the midst of their journey, they encountered various magical creatures, both friendly and wicked. They had to use their intelligence, courage, and teamwork to overcome each challenge. Snow White, with her kind heart, managed to win the favour of some magical creatures who helped them. The dwarves, with their unique abilities, complemented and assisted each other. After passing various trials, they finally reached the Good Witch's dwelling. However, the trials were not over yet. The Good Witch gave them a final test. They had to prove their sincere friendship. This test would determine whether they were worthy of receiving help from the Good Witch to confront Queen Maleficent. Their success in passing this test would determine their fate. The Good Witch, an old woman with long white hair and shining eyes, warmly welcomed Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. She had heard their story from the birds flying over the enchanted forest. She tested the sincerity of their friendship by asking them to solve a complex riddle that could only be solved with perfect teamwork. The riddle involved 7 keys, each held by one dwarf, and a locked treasure chest. Each key had a different symbol, and only by arranging the symbols in the correct order could the chest be opened. The dwarfs, with their different abilities and personalities, initially struggled to work together. Differences of opinion and egos nearly caused them to fail. However, Snow White managed to mediate and guide them. She reminded them of the importance of friendship and teamwork. With patience and wisdom, she succeeded in uniting them. Finally, with perfect cooperation, they managed to solve the riddle and open the treasure chest. Inside the chest was a magical potion that could protect them from Queen Maleficent's magic. The Good Witch gave the potion to Snow White. She also provided advice and guidance on how to confront Queen Maleficent. This meeting with the Good Witch was a turning point in the story. They had successfully passed the test and gained the strength to face their enemy. However, they also realized that the battle against Queen Maleficent would be very difficult and full of risks. After receiving the magical potion from the Good Witch, Snow White and the 7 dwarfs began their journey back to the kingdom. They knew that Queen Maleficent would surely be searching for them. They had to return carefully and cautiously. Along the way home, they faced various new obstacles. They had to avoid Queen Maleficent's spies and confront traps that had been set. They used the magical potion to protect themselves from Queen Maleficent's magic. The potion gave them extra strength and courage. They also used their intelligence and teamwork to overcome each challenge. Strong protected them from physical attacks, Doc devised strategies, and Sneezy provided early warnings of impending danger. In the midst of their journey, they encountered Brutus, the hunter who had saved Snow White at the beginning of the story. Brutus felt guilty for letting Snow White go. He apologized and offered his help. Snow White forgave him and accepted his assistance. Brutus, with his experience as a hunter, helped them avoid traps and confront enemies. They finally reached the outskirts of the kingdom. They saw the royal palace in the distance. However, they also saw Queen Maleficent's army waiting for them. They knew that the battle was unavoidable. They had to prepare themselves for the final battle against Queen Maleficent and her forces. The climax of the story became increasingly tense. They had reached the point where they had to confront their enemy directly. A great battle was about to begin. The battle at the palace gates began. Queen Maleficent's army, consisting of various evil creatures such as goblins, orcs, and wicked wolves, attacked Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Brutus led the dwarfs and Snow White in the battle. Strong, with his incredible strength, managed to defeat many enemies. Sneezy, with his speed, was able to dodge enemy attacks and deliver quick and precise counterattacks. Doc devised effective strategies to defeat the enemies. Snow White, with the magical potion she possessed, was able to protect herself and her friends from Queen Maleficent's magic. She also used her kind heart to persuade some evil creatures to turn against Queen Maleficent. Some goblins and orcs who were once enemies eventually sided with Snow White and her friends. Despite the fierce battle, Snow White and her friends managed to defeat most of Queen Maleficent's army. However, Queen Maleficent herself had yet to appear. She was still hiding in the palace, planning her next attack. The battle at the palace gates had demonstrated the strength and courage of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. They had successfully overcome a significant challenge, but the battle was not over. Queen Maleficent remained a formidable threat. The anticlimax began where they had won a small battle, but the larger battle still awaited them. After defeating most of Queen Maleficent's army at the palace gates, Snow White and the seven dwarfs, along with Brutus, entered the palace. They knew that Queen Maleficent was waiting for them inside. The atmosphere inside the palace was tense. Dark shadows danced on the walls of the grand palace. They found Queen Maleficent in the throne room. She looked more beautiful and powerful than ever. She had used her magic to strengthen herself. Queen Maleficent attacked them with devastating magic. However, Snow White and her friends managed to withstand the attack thanks to the magical potion and solid teamwork. Strong held off Queen Maleficent's physical attacks, while Doc searched for weaknesses in her magic. Sneezy moved quickly to avoid attacks, and Snow White used her kind heart to try to persuade Queen Maleficent to stop her evil ways. Brutus protected Snow White from dangerous attacks. In a tense battle, Doc discovered the weakness of Queen Maleficent's magic. He managed to destroy Queen Maleficent's magic wand with a precisely thrown stone. Queen Maleficent lost her power and transformed into an old, weak and frail figure. She finally surrendered and admitted her defeat. The battle in the palace had ended, Queen Maleficent had been defeated, and the threat to the kingdom was over. After Queen Maleficent's defeat, the atmosphere in the kingdom turned peaceful. Snow White, with her kind heart, decided to forgive Queen Maleficent. She realized that Queen Maleficent was merely a victim of her own pride and jealousy. Snow White asked the dwarfs and Brutus not to take revenge on Queen Maleficent. Queen Maleficent, who had lost her power and beauty, regretted her actions. She apologized to Snow White and the entire kingdom. She promised to change and become a better person. Snow White accepted her apology and offered to help her change. The kingdom celebrated the victory of Snow White and the seven dwarfs. They were hailed as heroes. Snow White and the seven dwarfs remained in the kingdom, and they lived happily ever after. They often visited their wooden cottage in the forest. Brutus, who had shown remorse and bravery, was appointed as the head of the royal guard. The story of Snow White and the seven dwarfs became a legend passed down from generation to generation. This story teaches the importance of kindness, friendship, courage, and forgiveness. The moral of the story is clearly conveyed. Goodness will always triumph over evil, and forgiveness is the key to achieving true peace. Years later, the kingdom lived in peace and prosperity. Snow White ruled wisely and justly, assisted by the seven loyal dwarfs as her advisors. Brutus, who had proven his loyalty, became the respected head of the royal guard. Queen Maleficent, after undergoing a period of remorse and repentance, found inner peace and spent her days helping others, using her magical skills for good. The wooden cottage in the forest became a cozy retreat for Snow White and the seven dwarfs. They often spent time there, reminiscing about their challenging adventures. Their story became a legend passed down through generations, teaching the values of friendship, courage, and forgiveness. One day, Snow White and the seven dwarfs held a grand feast at the palace to celebrate the kingdom's anniversary. All the kingdom's inhabitants were invited, including Queen Maleficent, who had now become part of the peaceful community. The feast became a symbol of the new harmony created after the great conflict they had endured. Everyone lived in harmony and happiness, enjoying the peace they had long dreamed of. This story ends with a powerful message about the importance of unity, forgiveness, and the strength of goodness to overcome evil. The peaceful and harmonious life in the kingdom stands as a testament that kindness and genuine friendship can create a better world.